Man, that was tough to watch. Volk looked like he was on the verge of tears standing with the ref, and he was out cold for a long time, and that was just an absolutely devastatingly brutal knockout. Congrats to Ilia, of course, and it does make my last video age better, but man, that's so not worth it. Just poor Volk, man. But let's talk about this card from bottom to top. At least the fights people care about, aka the main card, since I'm obviously a filthy casual. But let's be honest, who cares about the unranked WMMA early prelims fights? Yeah, not even you do, guy who watches every event alongside an MMA guru stream. Alright, main card opener, Anthony Hernandez versus Roman Kopylov. I'd Kopylov by KO. In the first round, looked like that was going to be the case, especially early on in the first. Kopylov was landing some great body shots that looked like they were hurting Hernandez quite a bit. But yeah, eventually the constant takedowns caught up to Roman Kopylov. He did escape the first rear naked choke, but got locked up again right after. I mean, hey, we got a pretty great meme out of the fight with this image, though. 2023 was the year of the underdog with guys like O'Malley and Strickland getting the belt. Is 2024 maybe the year of the fraud check? Mike Mallet, Joe Pyfer, and now Roman Kopylov have all been fraud checked and were previously very hyped prospects. I guess we'll have to see if the trend continues. Overall, pretty solid fight. Not bad, not amazing either. I think after this fight, Kopylov still could break into the rankings against a different opponent where the grappling isn't as big of an issue, but he definitely isn't a future champion like some other people were hyping him up to be, especially since he's already 32, so he doesn't necessarily have a whole ton of time to go and improve. I think Joe Pyfer versus Roman Kopylov could be the fight to make next. Maybe it's the co-main of an Apex fight night. On to the next fight. This was probably my most anticipated fight of the night, and it was my fight of the night, to be honest, just, entertainment wise, between this and the co-main at least, which we'll get to in a bit. My GOAT Merab did pull off the victory, absolutely clowning on Henry Cejudo. Round 1, yes, it wasn't looking great for Merab. He was getting dominated on the ground by Cejudo. Cejudo really showcased his positional wrestling against Merab in this round, alongside piercing him up on the feet pretty bad at some points. Landed a lot of great shots there, but of course the legendary Merab pace started to wear on Cejudo in the later rounds, leading to Merab winning rounds 2 and 3, but he also got some awesome moments in each of these rounds. Holding a choke to show off to Mark Zuckerberg, then carrying around Henry Cejudo like his name is Daniel Cormier, and just absolutely embarrassing the Olympic wrestling gold medalist. We honestly got a lot of memes out of tonight. Hernandez choking out Kopylov, Merab clowning on Cejudo in those two separate moments, and of course, sadly, the poorly aged Volk old man memes. Now, this win wasn't quite as dominant as the Peter Yan fight, but it was still a pretty great win nonetheless. Let's remember that Henry Cejudo was just coming off a close split decision with prime Aljamain Sterling, who's probably a top 3 bantamweight all time. A lot of people were calling Cejudo a washed old man leading up to this fight. I don't think that's the case at all. Cejudo is still a great fighter, but at the same time, he also has no reason to continue fighting. He had no reason to come back in the first place, but there's absolutely no reason to keep fighting contenders. Now, what's next for Merab? Without a doubt, it's the winner of O'Malley versus Vera. I believe Dana White actually said this would be the case in the post-fight press conference as well. But who knows, maybe O'Malley really wants to go up and fight Topuria, but I bet after seeing Topuria's performance against Volk, I'm sure O'Malley would rather get wrestle for 5 rounds by Merab than get knocked out by Ilia Topuria. And I know Corey Sandhagen deserves a title shot too, but if you can only pick one, you gotta go with Merab. I mean, look at Merab's last 3 wins, all over former champions and Jose Aldo, Peter Yan, and now Henry Cejudo. In comparison, Corey has a streak of wins over Song Yadong, Marlon Vera, and Rob Font. Great names, but a weaker list overall. Now, this might be controversial, but I think Merab would really only need 1 to 2 title defenses to become the bantamweight GOAT, considering his current resume. I think that's pretty realistic. Beat O'Malley or Vera, then defend against Sandhagen. I think Merab wins against all 3 of those guys, since unlike Aljo, he actually has some striking capabilities. Sorry, Aljo. And, does all that. He's honestly in that conversation, since the bantamweight GOAT conversation is definitely the weakest of all GOAT conversations in any division. Now, the featured fight, Geoff Neal versus Ian Garry. Yeah, this one was kind of a snoozer. Adesanya versus Cannonier vibes. One guy circling around throwing kicks, and the opponent really struggling to close that gap, then being quite ineffective when they did sometimes close it. Now, I think a lot of people thought Neal won, but come on, that's just coping because you dislike Garry. The fight was nothing great. I thought it was okay, but not as bad as some people were saying. But either way, I'm still glad Ian Garry won, even if he didn't put on a phenomenal performance, since it'll be fun to have someone to root against in championship contention. He called out Colby Covington. I think that would be a great fight to make, especially since the entire MMA community seems to dislike both of these guys a lot right now, making the most hateable fight night main event of all time. Do it in either Seattle or Ireland, depending who you want to be the crowd favorite. Presumably that would mean Ireland. I imagine the UFC isn't too fond of Colby Covington after his pitiful performance against Leon Edwards at UFC 296. Now onto the co-main event alongside Merab versus Cejudo. This was my fight of the night. Overall though, I am probably leaning towards Merab Cejudo. but maybe that's just me being a degenerate. Comment down below, what was your fight of the night? Share these same fights as me or something else. I saw Lemos versus Dern one fight of the night, and no, just because Mackenzie Dern is hot does not make that fight of the night, but alright, I guess. But Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa, I think the easiest way to put this is that it was a lot closer than anybody thought would be the case. It could have been 29-28 in either direction. I personally gave round 1 to Costa due to that brutal kick at the end of the ground, with rounds 2 and 3 going to Whittaker, though round 2 was fairly close, with Costa getting quite a bit of damage early on in the round on Whittaker. All I can say though is 30-27 Whittaker is definitely an awful scorecard, but hey, I still think the right man won. But still definitely close fight, because, you know, before this fight, a lot of people were saying, oh, Costa is going to brutalize glass, chinny chin chin Whittaker, or Whittaker is going to style on and dominate the pullout king, but it ended up being a pretty bloody war. Whittaker was making the fight a dogfight when he didn't really need to. Costa, if he had higher fight IQ, probably could have taken the fight because of that, but Whittaker still got it done, proving he isn't finished after a knockout loss, something Volkanovski unfortunately can't say. But back to the co-main event, I think this sets up some good fights. Okay, look, I know Izzy doesn't deserve the title shot, but try and tell me that the UFC isn't getting some dollar signs in their eyes looking at Duplessis versus Adesanya versus Strickland versus Whittaker as a 5-round co-main event for a pay-per-view, maybe UFC 302 in June. Just tell me that wouldn't do some numbers, and I think a lot of people would be hyped for both of those fights. That'd give Izzy the time off he wanted. It lets DDP, Strickland, and Whittaker recover pretty good from each of their last fights, which were, of course, some bangers where they all took a lot of damage, and so you set it up like that. Guess what? Now you can have the winner of Duplessis versus Adesanya fight the winner of Strickland Whittaker, and then the loser of Duplessis Adesanya can fight the loser of Strickland versus Whittaker. I think that keeps it nice, simple, and tidy. Now, finally, man, the main event. I'm like still depressed after this one. Like the head kick from Islam was awful to watch, but at least we all knew Volk could go back down to his belt. But there was that fear that Volk's chin was permanently cracked, and he just made a career-ending decision by taking that fight on short notice. At the time, though, we could push those thoughts aside, but now it seems our worst fears have come true. He got his chin cracked at an old age, and now he's lost his belt. I'm starting to think we might see Volkanovski go the way of Anderson Silva and Tony Ferguson, since after the fight, he was still talking about how he wanted an immediate rematch. And all of these signs we are seeing from Volk are bad. He's just wanted to get in right away and not recover after the Islam KO. Now he wants to rematch against a dude who just brutally knocked him out. This is absolutely not the right mindset. He needs to take some time off or he's going to get brutalized again, especially because this KO was absolutely worse than the Islam KO. He completely slumped over and was out for quite a while after the KO. It wasn't like the Islam KO where he was still vaguely conscious during the whole thing. He was out cold. Not to mention cutting down all the way to 145 mean his brain was less hydrated, so it would have taken even more damage. But now let's get into the fight itself. As the commentary noted, Volk kept his chin right up in the air every time he backed up from punches, making himself very vulnerable. Overall, Volk was still more skilled than Topuria, winning the round with his kicks, but I was cringing every time Topuria got close, worried that he was going to catch Volk and sleep him. Of course, that did sadly happen midway through the second round. Watching the fight, Volk is still clearly the more skilled fighter, but the chin and the age, not a good combo. Like, are we going to start seeing pillow punchers KO Volk next, since it's not like it took a lot to KO Volk? The punches that KO'd him were basically the first ones to have landed cleanly from Ilia. Yes, I know Ilia has a lot of power, but at the same time, he ended up going to a decision with Josh Emmett despite landing a lot of hard shots on him. It seems like Volk needed to have perfect defense for 25 minutes, but even for someone as good as Volkanovski, that's not very possible. So probably even just last year, if Volk fought Ilia Topuria instead of Yair Rodriguez at UFC 290, he probably would have won against Ilia Topuria, since he was still more skilled than Ilia here at UFC 298. If Yair then fought Volk today, maybe he would have then finished Volk. I'm not trying to discredit Ilia Topuria, but fighting a dude who's past his athletic prime, who's coming off a quick turnaround following a brutal head kick loss, probably helps quite a bit with getting the win. Pretty good timing. Okay, maybe I should stop being salty about this result now, since I'm coping pretty hard right now being a Volk fan and having picked Volk, okay? My bad, so feel free to comment down below and clown on my coping. Feed the algorithm for me. But this begs the question, did Volk not take enough time off? Should he retire right now, and who should he fight next? Look, I can see some people saying Volk needs to retire right now. I disagree. He was still clearly above Topuria in skill, but his chin might simply not be there. But what will I say if Volk loses his next fight? You know, especially if it's via KO or TKO. Well, he has to retire. But how do we prevent that? Well, first, Volk, he needs to take a lot of time off. He also needs to pick the right opponent. Volkanovski wants an immediate rematch. No, Volk, I know you're a legend, but you're not doing that. You're going to sleep again if you try and have an immediate rematch with Ilia Topuria after he just brutally slept you. You're coming off 2 bad knockout losses, okay? So first, take a lot of time off. Don't fight again until 2025. Then Volk has to make the right opponent. He has to fight someone with some pillow hands, okay? So I think Volkanovski versus Sterling could be a good fight to make, assuming Aljamain Sterling gets past Calvin Kattar at UFC 300. I think it would be a competitive fight at this point between 2 guys who are widely considered the second best of all time in their respective divisions. So great Alexander Volkanovski versus Aljamain Sterling, pay-per-view co-main event in February of 2025. But if Volk loses that fight, then it's absolutely time to hang up the gloves while he's still an all-time great. Staying around for too long is what diminishes people's GOAT status. I think Anderson Silva would have a lot more people calling him the GOAT if he retired after the second Chris Weidman fight, for example. Tony Ferguson, if he retired after the Chandler fight, would be better remembered too. Losing to Gaethje, Oliveira, Dariush, and Chandler isn't that bad. Losing to Wash and Nate Diaz, getting submitted in Bobby Green, and getting dominated by Paddy Pimblett is in fact a horrible, horrible look. How much will it tarnish Volk's legacy if he rematches Topuria and gets KO'd again, then gets 50-45'd by Aljo, then gets KO'd by Diego Lopez, then is submitted by Bryce Mitchell, then finally retires after getting KO'd by an unranked guy? Exactly, that's going to hurt his resume and GOAT status and legacy a lot. Plus, it'll obviously be painful to watch, and just him personally, that's going to be a lot more brain damage that he doesn't need to go and take. He already has GOAT status, or very close to it at least. He's already made good money with the amount of, pay-per-views he's headlined. So take a long time off, then fight someone with pillow fists, and if you win Volk, fight for the belt. If he loses, he's going to have to retire. If he then loses after fighting for the belt, once again, go and retire. I think Volk has a mental thing around fighting. He's addicted to it. This is what he was saying leading up to the Makhachev fight and why he needed to take it. He felt empty without fighting. So maybe he can hopefully move that, energy into coaching, since he does have pretty great fight IQ. That way he can still, be using that energy he has for fighting without giving himself more unnecessary brain damage. Now, what about the new champion, Ilia Topuria? I would say the fight to make is absolutely against Max Holloway. A fight I think Max would win, by the way. Max is a lot younger than Volk. His chin at this point is clearly much better, and with his height, he's not going to get caught in the same way Volk was by Topuria. I could see a decision going Max's way, 49-46, 48-47. Now, of course, Max will need some time off after the Gaethje fight. Regardless of the result, it'll likely be a war that'll require time off. If Max wins, let Charles or Arman fight Islam while he fights Topuria, then goes back up to fight Islam, or Charles or Arman if they happen to have beat Islam. If he loses, he can fight Topuria and stay at featherweight. But imagine how sick that would be, Max Holloway avenging Volkanovski and being Topuria and Islam. But that's way out there. I think Holloway beats Topuria, but he loses to Islam and Gaethje in my opinion. But now you're probably thinking, okay, Max probably can't fight till late in the year. Well, perfect. Topuria isn't very active, so it should line up well for both of them. Topuria was calling out Conor McGregor in his post-fight interview. Conor McGregor hasn't fought at featherweight in nearly a decade. I'm sure me saying that just made some of you guys feel real old, but let's be honest, that fight's not happening. Chances are there's a good shot he's probably never even going to go and fight Chandler, okay? And I get it, Topuria wants a red panty night, but we all know Holloway's the only man who deserves the title shot next, since Volk absolutely needs some time off. But yeah, pretty depressing card to watch. Good fights, but yeah, that main event, just depressing. Comment down below your thoughts on the card and main events especially. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.